Hello, everyone. It's February 23rd. This is Doug Rogers.
This is Russell Rogers. We're the Rogers team from Keller Williams Southlake. Let's talk DFW real estate. So, Doug, you did some research for us. We got an interesting trend going. You have a buyer looking in kind of the Dallas area and Dallas and suburbs, and you found an interesting trend. Why don't you kind of break that down for us?
Two good pieces of information. Number one is there was a lot of inventory. We looked and we looked and we looked. We probably looked at 30 or 40 houses. And the thing we found interesting was that about 40% are vacant. And then started digging a little deeper because each time we showed one of these vacant houses, they tended to have some issues and they weren't in the greatest condition. And 40% of these houses that were for sale, I would say 90% of that 40% were owned by investors. So investors are flipping houses and they're dumping the equity houses, the houses the big corporations bought. They're making up 30%, 40% of the market, depending on what part of town you're in.
Yeah, and just to give everyone a historical context, of course we don't have the numbers, but what do you think that would normally look like in, like, let's say if it was 2018, 2019, pre-COVID?
Oh, it would be, if you're looking at just talking about vacant houses, if you go and look at 10 houses, one or two would be vacant, maybe three at the most. One. Historically, when I started selling real estate, you had to be really good at timing your drive because you're going to see 10 houses. You're seeing the first one at 10, the second one at 10:30, the next one at 11, and you had to be right on time because homeowners and kids and dogs and pets are coming and going. So you had to be good at what you did. This vacant list made it a lot easier, so we were just showing up when we wanted to show up because they're vacant. But the real key to this process has been the actual disclosure of what you're seeing when you get there because you're not being told the whole truth about the property because of the type of people that are selling it.
Yeah, getting in and then using it as like your buffer in your schedule is one thing, but then, going in and having to spend a lot of time to look at everything because they're not disclosing it is a whole other issue.
That's correct.
So what have you seen on some recently?
Okay, well, here's kind of a funny thing. If you can see it, I've got three different sellers' disclosures. This one, if you can see it in here, is unknown, 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 unknown. They just marked everything like they didn't know what it was. Now, the biggest disadvantage of buying from an investor or an equity company is they're going to tell you they don't know anything. And they're going to put disclaimers on there that they don't know anything. Well, they're really not telling you the whole truth. But let's say they were telling you the truth. The first disadvantage is they don't always know the age of the roof. Now, the age of the roof is important to you as a buyer because it's going to impact your homeowner's insurance. Because the first thing your homeowner's insurance is going to ask you is how old is the roof? Because if it's 20 years old and it's a 20-year roof or a 25-year roof, you're going to pay really high prices and have a terrible deductible. So you need to know this, and there's no way of knowing if they're not willing to tell you the truth. Now, there's one little trick that good agents know is that some houses have been sold multiple times over the last 10 years. If they've been sold multiple times, then they're in our system where you can go and look at the history of the house and pull up old sellers' disclosures. And in one case, I found one with, and you can use this in the future, Open Door had bought this house from a Coldwell Banker agent that I knew. So I called Open Door, said, hey, can I get a copy of that foundation report? Oh, we don't have it. Well, I called the listing agent who had it when they bought it the last time. And she said, oh, yeah, I got that. And, she sold this, to the previous owner who sold it to Open Door. And she had it in her file from 7 or 8 years ago. So there are ways if people are willing to pick up the phone and call their fellow agent and say, hey, I need your help. I'm selling an Open Door house. I'm selling a knock or one of these equity companies. And they know stuff. You can find out things from 2 or 3 purchases ago that can put you in the driver's seat or maybe save your buyer a lot of money.
And you have to do it too, right? Because what people don't understand is providing a seller's disclosure is required. However, the quality in which you fill it out is a whole other issue that I think the courts would decide if anything ever came up, lawyers and judges and juries, right? But in terms of, they did give you a seller's disclosure, but it's really not the intent, or in my opinion, not the intent, because you're supposed to fill it out to the kind of the best you can. And just putting unknown or saying like I've never been to the property is not really a sufficient way to do so. And we see this time and time again with these big box flippers, basically.
Well, here, let me read this to you. This is on a seller's disclosure, and they everything they put in the comment section was see at the end. See a disclosure at the end. See disclosure on page 4. And they put this in here. Seller makes no makes the following disclaimer. The information provided herein is based on information provided to seller by the other third parties, should not be solely relied upon. Seller has not had the property inspected, which means when they bought it, they never inspected it. I don't believe it. And has never personally occupied, inspected, or visited the property, and as a result, seller has no firsthand knowledge of the condition of the property. Buyer agrees it is not relying on any disclosures or lack of disclosures made herein. So you're telling me this $1 million company or $1 million flipper or somebody who's got the money to buy and sell houses didn't get an inspection when they bought it and didn't renegotiate when they bought that house to check the roof, check the air conditioning, check the foundation, so that they could properly negotiate the lowest, best price when they bought it. They just said, oh, we'll just take it without an inspection. Here's an offer.
And I wonder too, like, is it, these forms are made for families buying and selling their properties. They're not made for corporations to be doing this, right? And I wonder if some of these forms should really say, and this would go to the lawyers, but, you or one of your agents, have they done X, Y, and Z, right? Because maybe that person that filled it out hasn't gone, but has an agent of that company gone, even if it's a third party. So I find it, to your point, very suspicious that no one associated with that company has gone to that property at any time that has any responsibility whatsoever.
Well, one of my favorite mentors, David Kelch, who was my manager at Coldwell Banker for 14 years, he always said, when in doubt, disclose. When in doubt, disclose. He said it over and over again. If you don't know for sure, disclose. Because picture yourself in front of a jury. Now, you're either the broker or, in this case, let's say the billion-dollar company, and there's Bob and Susie Homemaker with their 6-year-old and their 3-year-old and their little dog, and they're the ones facing this evil empire of wealth who should have known better, and they lied to these young people who bought this house. How do you think the jury and the judge are going to rule on that? It's not going to be a flip of the coin.
We've talked about it before when we sell properties. Of course, I haven't done so yet, but I'm going to disclose to the utmost I can. I mean, every little piece of chip paint I can find, room to room, I'm going to try to get everything down on paper and provide that to people. So in that exact situation, it's like, hey, I did everything I could. If something came up later, there's not, nothing in my power. And there's a lot of things too in law, from my understanding, is it's like for a landlord, you knew or you should have known. Just because you didn't know doesn't mean that you shouldn't have known. And if basically pointing to negligence, and it's kind of getting to this too, it's like, this is almost negligent in what they're doing, that they should know that any information they were provided previously should be passed through on these documents, but isn't.
Well, it might not be negligence. It might be deceptive. It's a
fraud.
Deceptive the fraud part of it, because they really do know.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that. I was privy to some information regarding one of the big home buying and flipping companies in the Metroplex. I knew their closer and the person who closed their transactions, and they did inspections, and they would have a negotiated dollar amount for, if you didn't fix the broken window or the broken oven or the air conditioning unit, or you didn't fix something, and you got to closing, they would say, "Oh, well, you're going to owe us. We're taking off $3,000 or $4,000 off your net because you didn't do the agreed upon repair." And how could they come up with that number if they didn't do an inspection? And for years, that company has not turned over those inspections to the buyers, and it's literally thousands upon thousands of homes have sold through that company where they did. Now, they might not have used a Texas inspector or a licensed inspector, but they used someone who's in the trade to walk through the house to create a punch list, and that punch list should be disclosed. If they find 10 items and 4 of them were repaired and 6 of them were not, those 6 items not repaired that were deemed on that poor seller who got sucked into that process, that should be on the seller's disclosure. But they're making, we don't know. We don't know anything. We didn't see it. We didn't hear it. It's 3 blind mice.
And then that's kind of my point too about that whole, we've never been there on that disclosure, is because even if that person has an agent of the company, because I think what they say on those, the scenario you're describing, is that it's not an inspector, it's an internal employee, and therefore it's like basically planning for their future upgrades or repairs. But then they should have to disclose all of that, because that corporation, who is now the owner, knows about them, even if it's just an agent of the corporation. And I'm not talking real estate agent. I mean like agent in the law sense. And maybe lawyers would disagree with everything we're saying here, but this doesn't seem to be the intent in which these forms were created to protect buyers and sellers. So
That's correct. Well, now the next process is understanding the process. Now, if you make an offer to John Doe who's selling his house, you call up his agent. Agent gives John Doe a call and say, "Hey, they're offering $300,000. They want the window fixed, and they can close on March 31st." They come, it's all right there, and it's a phone call, and it gets done really quickly. When you make an offer on these corporate-owned properties, some of them it's uploading contracts into a portal, and it's going to a bureaucrat sitting in a cubicle, and you've got to prepare buyers that it's not going to go quickly, smoothly, and it's going to be technical and not, a quick negotiation.
yeah, there's not really a face on the other side. You're dealing with just a bureaucratic entity. It's almost like dealing with the government in a lot of ways. And hopefully, outside of right now with this weird trend we're seeing, hopefully, the buyer isn't buying one of these, but when they do, or when there's actually a good one, because there are some good ones that unfortunately the sellers made the wrong decision, in my opinion, to sell to one of these companies instead of listing and going through the traditional means, because they've probably lost money, and the DOJ would claim so in some of their findings. But hopefully you don't get to that. But if you do, there's really not a negotiation, and you're kind of at their whim, basically.
There's probably 2 or 3 different type groups out there. The one that I'm working on right now is a fix and flip. So we actually could see when the house sold the last time. And we also had the ability, since I could see that it sold the last time, I pulled up all the comparables for the last 6 months, and I said, well, there's the house. And then I pull it up. Let's see what they did to it. So we could see what kind of condition it was in, what they did to it, and the repairs. But we also got to pull up their seller's disclosure from the last time. So I got my buyer the previous seller's disclosure and then the partially filled out seller's disclosure from the new corporate type flipper. And he's got both to make and weigh his decision upon going forward.
And then as the buyer too, especially working with us, then they'll have their own inspector look at everything. And so they'll have that extra layer of protection. But it is a little bit more risky, but luckily for yours, like you're saying, you have that extra information. But the one of the big box ones we're talking about, sometimes you don't have that. And honestly, I don't even like to show them because they always look so terrible and they're so poorly done. I think the one you're talking about was more of like a smaller contractor that did a pretty good flip from what you could tell.
Yeah, well, here's the first thing you can spot whenever you're looking at these. You don't even have to look at the ownership or the listing broker. Look at the yard. And the first time you look at the picture, they do good pictures. They hire professional photographers to take their pictures. But look at the backyard pictures. The grass is all dead. If the grass is all dead in the front and the grass is all dead in the back, it's been rented for 3 or 4 years and no one watered the yard. And that has a cascading effect onto the foundation, because if they haven't been taking care of the yard, that means the foundation is getting super dry. And the real key to a foundation isn't necessarily just watering the foundation, it's making sure it's balanced all the way around the house. So if it's really dry on one side and really wet on the others, say you've got a neighbor who's overwatering, or you've got a swell that's creating dampness and it's super dry on one side, you're going to crack that foundation. So dead yard. Next, we want to go and look in the air conditioning units and see how they've been taken care of, because some of those, if they haven't changed the filter in 6 months, they're in bad shape. So you just got to keep digging and digging and digging when you're looking at one of these corporate owned properties. Yeah,
definitely. So, and you do that anyway, but here it's like, there's going to be a problem, or there's a much more higher likelihood that there is one. So it's like, if you see a crack, you start thinking about foundation, but here you should almost immediately go to looking at that. So
we plan ahead. We're going to get a structural engineer to look at the property. We've got a thorough inspection lined up. And you also have to prepare your buyer and tell them, these guys are not going to do any repairs. They're going to give you money. They're either going to lower the sales price, or they're going to give you a couple $1,000s off the sales price, or of course your closing costs, but they don't want to hire a contractor to go out there and repair anything. So you've got to know that ahead of time, that if you're buying one of these, you better be prepared to hire your own contractor, and you better get a bid and figure out what the exact cost of that repair is going to be. Because here's the trick that they'll pull on you. They'll tell you, oh, well, the air conditioning unit, the differential's off. Well, we'll give you $500 for that. Well, what if it needs a new compressor? What if the coil is bad? Well, there's thousands of dollars that could be repaired in that system. It might not be a $500 capacitor that needs to be replaced. It could be really expensive. So when they start throwing you a few $100 here and there just to go away and close on the deal, you may not want to do that. You may want to make another phone call and get a real AC guy out there to double check it.
Yeah, definitely. And then also maybe think about getting a home warranty or a higher level or a better one for those kind of situations.
Well, two things to end on. I just want to cover right quick. Something else is happening in the marketplace. So if you're thinking about selling a house, this is going to be interesting. We did skip a month. So you might have noticed that we haven't been around. We have a new baby in the family. So Russell and Aurelia have a new baby, and I have a new grandchild. So we took a few days off away from doing this, but we wanted to come back and tell you a couple things about what's changed in the marketplace over the last 30 days. The number of listings on the market have dropped dramatically. In the Grapevine, Colleyville, South Lake off area, there's 226 listings. There's normally 300 plus. In the Flower Mound, Capel, Highland Village area, there's normally 200 or so listings, and they're down to 145. In the Alliance Corridor, right when we did our last meeting, 428 listings, and we're now down to 332. Frisco, Plano, 639 was the last report we gave. It's currently at 499, so it's dropped 140 units. So if you think about it, with all these vacant houses and these builders, these flippers and corporate guys dumping these properties, without those guys, our inventory would be really shallow. Now, the other little side note is the interest rates have popped back up. The current fixed rate is averaging around 7%. On the 30-year fixed, right at 7, 15-year 6.5, jumbo 7.4, FHA 6.65, and the VA is now at 6 5/8. So market has moved up a little bit on interest rates. The inventory has dropped. So if you're thinking about selling a house, it's not a bad time to get it on the market because your competition will be really short.